J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Ms. Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of United States veteran Mr. Willie B. Ford, Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Mosey May Smith Chambliss of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Daniel R. Scott of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. Woodrow Harris, Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of District Missionary Bertha Cobb Everett of Mount Vernon, New York, formerly of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Timothy Christopher Clark of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. United States Army veteran, Mr. Willie B. Ford, Jr., age 75, of 115 Timberland Drive, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, February 25th at his residence in Warwick, Georgia. The funeral service for United States Army veteran, Mr. Willie B. Ford, Jr., age 75, was held Sunday, March 5th, in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Donnie R. Hall Sr. officiated. The burial with military honors followed at the Red Oak Cemetery, Doles Community, Warwick, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mrs. Prenda Ford Williams and her husband, Mr. Willie Williams of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Caroline Ford Scott and her husband, Mr. Dante Scott of Leesburg, Georgia, Miss Tasha Alfred of Sylvester, Georgia, Miss Devorah Riley of Warner Robins, Georgia, Miss Shavita Jackson and Miss Retha Ross, both of Live Oak, Florida. 13 beloved grandchildren, 20 great-grandchildren, a very special friend, Miss Diane Ross of Live Oak, Florida. His loving and devoted sisters, Miss Patricia A. Norris of Albany, Georgia, and Mrs. Betty Ford and her husband, Steve Ford of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His beloved brothers, Mr. Ben Morris of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Joe Ray Ford and his wife, Mrs. Deela Ford of Oak Creek, Wisconsin, Mr. Jimmy Ford and his wife, Mrs. Doris Ford of Rappaport, Illinois, and Mr. Michael Ford of Chicago, Illinois. His special caregivers, Mr. Raymond Williams and Mrs. Jacqueline Nelson Hill, 2 beloved sisters-in-law, 1 brother-in-law, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. United States Army veteran, Mr. Willie B. Ford Jr., age 75, of 115 Timberland Drive, Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Mosey May Smith Chambliss, age 75, of 205 West 24th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, February 28th at her residence in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Mosey May Smith Chambliss, age 75, was held Sunday, March 5th, in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved cousin, the Reverend Arthur Hoggebrook, officiated. The burial followed at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Johnny Dawson and his wife, Mrs. Carol Dawson, Mr. Steve Dawson and his companion, Miss Gwen Denard of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Carla Dawson of Jonesburg, Georgia, Mr. Jason Gaines and his wife, Mrs. Shalandra Gaines of Hawkinsville, Georgia, Miss Connie West and her husband, Mr. Kelvin West of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Chastity Green and her husband, Mr. Travis Green of Vienna, Georgia. 30 beloved grandchildren, a host of great-grandchildren, her loving and devoted sisters, Miss Nina Dean and her husband, Mr. Lestering Dean, Miss Tilla McCrae, Miss Bobby Faye McCrae and her companion, Mr. Andrew Yah, and Miss Geneva McCrae, all of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Casey McCrae of St. Petersburg, Florida. Her beloved aunt, Mother Ella Mae Hoggebrook of Albany, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends, to include Miss Christine Callahan and Miss Justine Jeffries, both of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Marie Hill of Columbus, Georgia. All survive. Miss Mosey May Smith Chambliss, age 75, of 205 West 24th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Daniel R. Scott, age 25, of 391 Dykes Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia, died Wednesday, March 1st at the Tiff Regional Hospital in Tifton, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Daniel R. Scott, age 25, was held Friday, March 10th in the sanctuary of the Madison Avenue Church of God by Faith in Ashburn, Georgia. The pastor, Elder Larry Coffey, officiated. The eulogy was delivered by Apostle Chastity Trammell. The burial followed at the Piney Grove Church Cemetery in Rochelle, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Julia Emery of Rochelle, Georgia, his loving and devoted father, Prophet Michael D. Scott of Sycamore, Georgia, his beloved sisters, Mr. Tashonda Emery and Miss LaPortia Emery, both of Rochelle, Georgia, his beloved brothers, Mr. Michael Scott of Rochelle, Georgia, and Mr. Victor Grace and his wife, Miss Kenesha Grace of Hawkinsville, Georgia, his beloved grandparents, Miss Norma Emery of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. Eli and Mrs. Florine Scott of Sycamore, Georgia, a host of devoted aunts and uncles, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Daniel R. Scott, age 25, of 391 Dykes Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia. Mr. Woodrow Harris Jr., age 58, of 517 Barlow Street, Americus, Georgia, died Monday, March 6, at the Emory St. Joseph Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Woodrow Harris Jr., age 58, was held Saturday, March 11th, in the sanctuary of the Bethesda Missionary Baptist Church in Americus, Georgia. The pastor, the Reverend Dr. Key Anthony Brooks, officiated. The burial followed at the Eastview Cemetery in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted daughters, Miss Chastity Hartage and her husband, Mr. Jermaine Hartage of Orlando, Florida, Mrs. Tiffany Martin and her husband, Jason Martin of Chattanooga, Tennessee, a beloved grandson, Master Andrew Martin, his beloved and devoted sisters, Miss Cheryl Mann and Dr. Joanne Trullo, and her fiancé, Mr. Tim DeMott, all of Americus, Georgia, his beloved and devoted brother, Mr. Michael Williams of Americus, Georgia, and his fiancée, Miss Brenda Scott of St. Petersburg, Florida. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mr. David Harris, Mr. James Harris, Mr. Ike Harris, Mr. Romo Harris, Mrs. Dorothy Owens, Miss Virginia King, Miss Georgia Solomon, Miss Murtis Brown, Miss Ethel Didell, Mr. Charles Miller, Mr. George Austin, Mr. Algie Didell, and Mr. John Tripp. His beloved nieces and nephews, a host of devoted cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends, to include Mr. Bobby Hartage, survived Mr. Woodrow Harris, age 58, of 517 Barlow Street, Americus, Georgia. District Missionary Bertha Cobb Everett, age 78, of Mount Vernon, New York, formerly of Cordele, Georgia, died Monday, February 20th in Mount Vernon, New York. The committal service for District Missionary Bertha Cobb Everett, age 78, was held Saturday, March 11th at the Camp Creek Baptist Church Cemetery in Unadilla, Georgia. Her beloved nephew, the Reverend Wesley I. Spears, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted sons, Mr. Arthur Everett and Mr. Donald A. Everett, both of New York, New York. Her devoted and caring sisters, Mrs. Mary Pearl Cuthbert of Lithonia, Georgia, Miss Diana Cobb Jacob of Lawrenceville, Georgia, and Miss LaJoyce Cobb Wordley. Her loving sister-in-law, missionary Ola Everett Mike of Cordele, Georgia, a host of devoted nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. District Missionary Bertha Cobb Everett, age 78, of Mount Vernon, New York, formerly of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Timothy Christopher Clogg, age 53, of 108 South 13th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Monday, March 6 at his residence in Cordele, Georgia. A memorial service for Mr. Timothy Christopher Clogg, age 53, was held Saturday, March 11. The remains were cremated. Survivors include his loving and devoted companion, Miss Shaquita Hill of Cordele, Georgia, his loving and devoted children, Mr. Jaquaria Greer, Miss Carisha Hill, Miss Jayla Hill, and Mr. Zaquarian Dorsey, his loving and devoted sibling, Mr. John Lee Clark III, and his wife, Mrs. Alicia Clark, Miss Veronica M. Clark, Miss Valerie Clark, all of Cordele, Georgia. A brother-in-law, Mr. Michael J. Nelson of Cordele, Georgia. Two special friends he considered as brothers, Mr. Curtis Jones and Mr. Bobby Johnson, both of Warwick, Georgia. A host of cousins to include his special cousins, Miss Rhonda Quarterman and Miss Loretta Carter of Warwick, Georgia, his beloved nieces and nephews, a host of other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Timothy Christopher Clogg, age 53, of 108 South 13th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Again, the family of United States veteran Mr. Willie B. Ford Jr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mrs. Mosey May Smith Chambliss of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Daniel R. Scott of Rochelle, Georgia, the family of Mr. Woodrow Harris Jr. of Americus, Georgia, the family of District Missionary Bertha Cobb Everett of Mount Vernon, New York, formerly of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Timothy Christopher Clark of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank all of their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Travis Montrell Pace, age 44, of 237 Railroad Street, DeSoto, Georgia, died Tuesday, March 7th at the Phoebe Putnam Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Andrea Williams Pace of DeSoto, Georgia. His loving and caring daughters, Miss Tamika Bryant of Leslie, Georgia, Miss Shea Pace of Americus, Georgia, his beloved son, Mr. Travis M. Pace, Jr., and Mr. Trevon Pace of DeSoto, Georgia. One stepson, Mr. Kadarius M. Bryant. Four beloved grandchildren, a devoted sister, Mrs. Diane Pace Mercer, and her husband, Deacon Freddie Mercer of Leslie, Georgia. One beloved brother, Mr. Alonzo Pace of DeSoto, Georgia. A special aunt, Miss Teresa Cooks of DeSoto, Georgia. His special uncle, Mr. Willie D. Pace of DeSoto, Georgia. A special cousin, Miss Janie Carter of Americus, Georgia. A host of devoted aunts and uncles, many nephews, nieces, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Travis Montrell Pace, age 44, of 237 Railroad Street, DeSoto, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Travis Montrell Pace, age 44, will be held today, Sunday, March 12th at 1 p.m. in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. His beloved uncle, the Reverend Eugene Hall, will officiate. The burial will follow at the Council Cemetery in Leslie, Georgia. Mr. Kavachi Taiwan Armstrong, Sr., age 44, of 306 Porter Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Wednesday, March 1st in Ellenwood, Georgia. Survivors include his beloved wife, Mrs. Brandy B. Armstrong, his loving and caring children, Mr. Kavachi T. Armstrong Jr., Miss Sabrina J. Armstrong, both of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Cavarius T. Armstrong of Tallahassee, Florida, Mr. Quinte Griffin of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. Byron L. Armstrong, Mrs. Linda R. Armstrong, and Mr. Cameron Redding, all of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Zaire Armstrong of Atlanta, Georgia, one grandchild, his beloved sisters, Miss Shantae Lofton of Tifton, Georgia, Miss Tiana Jones of Warner Robins, Georgia, and Miss Anna Byron of Tampa, Florida. His beloved brother, Mr. Andre Lofton, and Mr. Lemmy Lester, both of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved grandmother, Mrs. Eunice Lewis of Vienna, Georgia. A host of beloved aunts and uncles, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Kavachi Taiwan Armstrong Sr., age 44, of 319 Porter Street, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Kavachi Tyrone Armstrong Sr. will be held today Sunday at 4:30 p.m. in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Evangelist Gerald Lofton Miller will officiate. The burial will follow at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Miss Henry May Lewis, affectionately known as Bunchy, age 74, of 735 Fitzpatrick Place, Vienna, Georgia, died Wednesday, February 22nd at her residence in Vienna, Georgia. Survivors include a loving and devoted son, Mr. Jimmy Lee Lewis of Albany, Georgia, two beloved grandchildren, Miss LaQuasha Burns and Mr. Justin Jackson, both of Albany, Georgia, one great-grandchild, a host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Henry May Lewis, affectionately known as Bunchy, age 74, of 735 Fitzpatrick Place, Vienna, Georgia. Funeral service for Miss Henry May Lewis, affectionately known as Bunchy, age 74, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Mary Alice Felton Hall, age 60, of 918 Richardson Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, March 7th at Neverson Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted son, Mr. Derek Felton of Cordele, Georgia, three beloved grandchildren, a beloved mother, Mrs. Dorothy Felton Leggett of North Carolina, her caring brothers, Mr. Larry Leggett and his wife, Mrs. Jennifer Leggett of Warner Robins, Georgia, Mr. Jason Leggett and Mr. Michael Leggett, both of Hawkinsville, Georgia, Mr. Bernard Leggett of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Mr. Joseph Martin of Macon, Georgia, her beloved sisters, Mrs. Betty Ratliff and her husband, Mr. Ivy Ratliff of Hawkinsville, Georgia, Mrs. Deborah Hannon of Rochelle, Georgia, and Mrs. Wendy Hamilton Quinn and her husband, Mr. Carl Quinn of Centerville, Georgia. Her beloved aunts and uncles, Miss Aline Felton and Mr. Walter Felton and his wife, Mrs. Jeanette Felton, both of Lily, Georgia, and Mrs. Mary Stevenson of Belglade, Florida. Her great aunt, Miss Julia May Felton of Cordele, Georgia, a host of devoted nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Mary Alice Felton Hall, age 60, of 918 Richardson Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Mary Alice Felton Paul, age 60, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Jerry Lee Westbrook, age 60, of 1208 South 9th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, March 9th at the Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Survivors include a special friend, Miss Clara Royal of Cordele, Georgia, his loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Dorothy Mason and her husband, Deacon Willie Frank Mason, Miss Della Westbrook of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved brothers, Mr. James Westbrook and his wife, Mrs. Phyllis Westbrook of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Deacon Odell Westbrook and his wife, Deacon S. Dorothy Westbrook, Deacon Roger Westbrook and his wife, Deacon S. Brenda Westbrook, and Deacon Elvis Westbrook and his wife, Pastor Cleo Westbrook, all of Cordele, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Jerry Lee Westbrook, age 60, of 1208 South 9th Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Jerry Lee Westbrook, age 60, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
And now for announcements. The New Poplar Spring Baptist Church, Bonneville Family and Friends Day service will be held today, Sunday, March 12th, beginning at 9:45 a.m. Dr. Joseph Howard of the Metropolitan Baptist Church, Albany, will be the guest speaker. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Pastor Johnny Dean, pastor. The Mount Moriah Baptist Church of Unadilla 120th mission anniversary will be on Sunday, March 19th at 2 o'clock p.m. Mount Silla Baptist Church of Hawkinsville and Pastor A. Keith Green will be the special guest. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Sister Linda Ann Jordan, Mission President, Deacon Earl Jordan, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend Edward Lester is the pastor. The Friendship Baptist Church of Findlay choir anniversary will be Sunday, March 21st at 2 o'clock p.m. Refreshments will be served after the program. Sister Dolores Colbert is the choir president. Reverend Joseph Atkins is the pastor. You have a cordial invitation to worship with the Spring Hill Baptist Church today during their worship service, and each second and fourth Sunday beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Mother Lily Mathis is the church mother. Reverend Shannon Follett is the pastor. The Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them during their morning worship service. Sunday school at 9 o'clock a.m., morning worship at 9:30 a.m. Tuesday midday prayer conference at 12 o'clock noon. Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Deacon Arthur L. Parker is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship at the St. King Baptist Church during their worship service today, which begins at 10:15 a.m. Everyone has a cordial invitation. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church conference call scheduled for Sunday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Prayer Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon. Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The call-in number is 339-209-6419. Deacon Joe Wedges, Chairman of Deacons. Reverend Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. Everyone is cordially invited to worship at the Gethsemane Baptist Church today. Worship service begins at 10:30 a.m. Deacon Johnny Wilson, Chairman of Deacons. Reverend Cecil Straughter is the pastor. The Davis Chapel CME Church family extends a cordial invitation for you to worship with them each second and fourth Sunday at 10 o'clock a.m. Face masks are required. Stewart Ruby Barrett is the Chairman of Stewards. Reverend Arnell Wilburn is the pastor. The New Oak Grove Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them each Sunday for Sunday school beginning at 9:15 a.m. and worship service at 10 o'clock a.m. On Sunday, March 19th at 10 o'clock a.m., the church will observe the 83rd church anniversary. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Deacon Alonzo Jones is the chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The beautiful Zion Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them today at 11 o'clock a.m. Mother Grace Patrick Church Mother, Reverend Lorinda Ray, is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship with the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today during this worship service. Sunday school begins at 9:45 a.m., morning worship at 10:30 a.m. On Sunday, March 19th, the Mount Calvary Baptist Church will observe the church's 141st anniversary. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Sister Carrie Holmes, anniversary chairperson. Deacon Leon Spears, chairman of deacons. Reverend Isaac H. Owens is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship with the New Corinth Baptist Church, Hooks Mill Road. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship with them each third Sunday beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. The McAfee Grove Baptist Church of Leesburg invites everyone to worship with them during their family nights on Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m., small class study Thursday at 7 o'clock p.m., Sunday morning worship at 9 a.m. You may join them by calling 425-436-6341. The access code is 708058. Reverend Dr. Robert L. Morgan Sr. is the pastor. Truly Blessed Gospel Group will celebrate their 13th anniversary on Sunday, March 19th at the Zion Grove Baptist Church in Oakfield, Georgia. On program will be the Benjamin family, Chosen, Faithful and Determined, Stacy and the Anointed Voices, the Gospel Travelers, Danny Perry and Company, the Georgia Boys, and Elder Michael Turner. The doors open at 3 o'clock p.m. The program starts at 4 o'clock p.m. The Wilcox County Head Start is offering free child development services for eligible families with children ages 3 to 5. For more information, please contact Mrs. Donna Jenkins at 229-365-2341 or 478-922-4464. The regularly scheduled meeting of the Cordial Crisps NAACP is canceled for this afternoon. There will not be a meeting this afternoon. Reverend Isaac Owens, branch president. Attention, all ushers. The Lebanon Baptist Church ushers, please plan to meet on Monday, March 20th at 7 o'clock p.m. for your business and instructional ushers meeting. Ushers only. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. Deacon J.C. Bryant Jr. is the president. Reverend Christopher O. Bryant is the pastor. That concludes our announcements for this morning.
And now for dedication. Our first election this morning is dedicated to the following in loving memory of Mrs. Jewel Putman, who departed this life March 8th, 1977. Dedication requested by her beloved family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Christopher Al Daniels, who would have celebrated his birthday March 8th, dedication requested by the Daniels family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Deaconess Alberta King, who departed this life March 8th, 2013, and would have celebrated her birthday March 28th. Dedication requested by her beloved husband, Deacon Henry King, and the entire family. Gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Carrie Wellens, who departed this life March 9th. Dedication requested by the Patrick and Wellens family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mrs. Alberta Green, dedication requested by her beloved family. In loving memory of Mrs. Elsie Daphne, who would have celebrated her birthday March 10th, dedication requested by the Daphne family. In loving memory of Chairman Deacon O.C. Bud Smith, who departed this life March 11th, 1999, dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mother Leela Mae Smith, his children, grandchildren, and all of the members of the Zion Hope Baptist Church of Winona, Georgia, where he served as chairman of the Board of Deacons for many years. Deacon O.C. Bud Smith, gone but not forgotten, and have touched all of our lives there. In loving memory of Mr. John L. Colson, who would have celebrated his birthday March 11th, dedication requested by the Colson and Dennis family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mr. Charlie Lofton, who would have celebrated his birthday March 11th, dedication requested by the Lofton family. In loving memory of Mrs. Valerie Fuller King, who departed this life March 11th, 1997, dedication requested by Mrs. Annette Stembridge and family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Curtis Weaver, who would have celebrated his birthday March 11th, dedication requested by his beloved daughter, Miss Minnie Jackson and family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Sheila Jeanette Pickens Barber, who would have celebrated her birthday March 13th, dedication requested by the Pickens and Barber family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mrs. Danita Davis, who would have celebrated her birthday March 13th, dedication requested by Mrs. Mary Frances Davis, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Melba Bennett, who would have celebrated her birthday March 13th, dedication requested by the Everett and Bennett family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. John Patrick Sr., who departed this life March 14th, 1991, dedication requested by the Patrick family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Minister Virginia Rose Oliver, who would have celebrated her birthday March 15th, dedication requested by the Hardeman, Perkins, Murray, and Carr family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Deacon Earl Leary Sr., who would have celebrated his birthday March 15th, dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Willie Mae Leary, all of the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the entire Leary family, gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy birthday to our friend and brother, the Reverend Donnie R. Hall Sr., who celebrated his birthday Friday, March 10th. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Sister Amanda Hall, all of the children, grandchildren, and the entire family, as well as his many friends and the staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Happy birthday to the Reverend Donnie R. Hall Sr. on Friday, this past Friday, March 10th. God bless you. Birthday wishes goes out to Deacon S. Carrie Brooks, who celebrated her birthday Saturday, March 11th. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, and the entire family. Happy birthday to Miss Lavetta Field, who is celebrating her birthday today, March 12th. Dedication requested by the Fields family and Mrs. Mary Francis Davis. Special birthday wish goes out to our very own Mrs. Tammy Harvey of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, who is celebrating her birthday on today. Happy birthday, Miss Tammy, and many more. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: Deacon James Smith and family, Deacon Willis Smith and family of the Beulah Land Baptist Church, chairman of the Board of Deacons, Deacon Curtis Lucas and family, Miss Willie Mae Crapp and family, Deaconess Martha A. Cross and family, retired Commissioner A.J. and Mother Vera Rivers and family, Mother Mary Butler and family, Mother Willie McGill and family, the Felton and Wise family, Deacon John Lee and Sister Vera Perry and family, Vienna, Georgia, Mother Mary Benjamin and family, Mother Carolyn Johnson Wallace and family, Mrs. Thelma Sis Johnson and family, Mrs. Gladys Sister Porter and family, Deaconess President Cassandra Jackson and family, Mother Mary Henderson and family, Mrs. Elizabeth Style Waters and family, Mother Mamie Robinson of the New Beulah Baptist Church, Deacon Kelvin and Sister Rosemary Jones and family, Mr. and Mrs. Sam Oliver and family, Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Ford and family, the Reeves and Dalster family, Mr. and Mrs. Eddie Solomon and family, the Reverend Dorothy Jones and family, Deacon Fred Jones and family of Araby, Georgia, Miss Kay Brown and family of Araby, Georgia, and the entire Brown family, Elder J.C. and Minister Annette Clark and family, the Mercer and Lewis family, Minister Vernell Thomas and family. She also wished her daughter, Miss Tammy Harvey, a very special birthday. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Travis Montrell Pace, age 44, of 237 Railroad Street, DeSoto, Georgia, died Tuesday, March 7th at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Travis Montrell Pace, age 44, will be held today, Sunday, March 12th at 1 p.m. in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. His beloved uncle, the Reverend Eugene Hall, will officiate. The burial will follow at the Council Cemetery in Leslie, Georgia. Mr. Kavachi Taiwan Armstrong Sr., age 44, of 306 Porter Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Wednesday, March 1st at his home in Ellenwood, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Kavachi Taiwan Armstrong Sr., age 44, will be held today, Sunday, March 12th, in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home at 4:30 p.m. Evangelist Gerald Lofton Miller will officiate. The burial will follow at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Miss Henry's May Lewis, affectionately known as Bunchy, age 74, of 735 Fitzpatrick Place, Vienna, Georgia, died Wednesday, February 22nd at a residence in Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Henry's May Lewis, affectionately known as Bunchy, age 74, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Mary Alice Felton Paul, age 60, of 918 Richardson Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, March 7th at Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Mary Alice Felton Paul will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Jerry Lee Westbrook, age 60, of 1208 South 9th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, March 9th at the Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Jerry Lee Westbrook, age 60, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Diana are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our selection this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Willie B. Ford Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Mosey May Smith Chambliss of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Daniel R. Scott of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. Woodrow Harris Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of District Missionary Bertha Cobb Everett of Mount Vernon, New York, formerly of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Timothy Christopher Clark of Cordele, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mr. Travis Montrell Pace of DeSoto, Georgia. The family of Mr. Kavachi Taiwan Armstrong Sr. of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Miss Henrys May Lewis of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Mary Alice Felton Paul of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Jerry Lee Westbrook of Cordele, Georgia. This election is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in the armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker. This election goes out to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall and family, to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter, and her grandson, Noble. This election goes out to my sister, Mrs. Patsy Jackson, and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia, to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. Goes out to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, pastor of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church and moderator of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association. This election goes out to his wife, Sister Kathy Williams, to our son, the Reverend Christopher Williams, and the members of the Antioch Baptist Church of Cuthbert, Georgia. This election goes out to Chairman Deacon Tommy Ford Jr. and his wife, Sister Gradine Ford, and family. Goes out to Deaconess Osei Deacon Osei Outlaw and Deaconess Osei Outlaw and family, to our friend and brother, the Reverend Johnny B. Dean, and the members of the New Poplar Spring Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, the Lester family of Byronville, Georgia, Ms. Enora Ray and family, Minister Mrs. Robbie Williams and family, Mrs. Alma Johnston and family, Ms. Willie Mae Cobb and family, Mrs. Ernestine Gaines and family, Deacon Major Walker and family, Stuart Lonnie Barrett and family, Ms. Linda Butcher and family, Ms. Eula Hamilton and family, Mr. Edward Butler and family, Mrs. Carolyn Bolton and family, entire Bolton and Perry family, Mrs. Anna Roll and family, Mrs. Virginia Williams and family, Mrs. Christine Gaines and family, Mr. and Mrs. A.B. Levant and family, Mr. Wayne Foster and family, Mrs. Essie Gay and family, Mrs. Gwen Henderson and family, Mrs. Eddie Ruth White and family, Mr. Nicholas Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Broccoli Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Dwight Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Cedric Johnson and family, Mr. Reed Porter and family, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Fox and family, Mr. Robert and Mrs. Fannie Mae Polk and family, Minister Robbie and Mrs. Joanne Williams and family, Mr. James Reedy and family, Mr. Norris and Ms. Gail Bimry and family, Mrs. Dolores Lemons and family, Mrs. Nancy Bryant and family, Mr. Joseph Bryant III, the Reverend Jolie Butts and family, Mother Lucinda Ray and family, Mother Grace Patrick and family, Ms. Rosa Colbert and family, Ms. Janie Mae Miller and family, Mrs. Alice Mae McKenzie, the Reverend Alice Mae McKenzie and family, Mr. Frankie Lee Robinson and family, Mr. Lindbergh Smitty Williams, Smitty Smith and family, Ms. Darquita Hunt and family, Mr. Artis Dawson and family, Mr. John Reese and family, Mrs. Barbara Adams and family, Mrs. Virginia Everett and family, Mrs. Maddie Pope and family, Mrs. Effie Harvey, the family, Ms. Effie Harvey, Mr. Jermaine Harvey, and family. Our next selection this morning goes out to my neighbor, Mrs. Theron Jones and family, and the entire Jones and Tarbert family, Mother Dorothy Tarbert and family, Deacon and Mrs. John Stubbs and family, Deacon and Mrs. Donald Tarbert and family, Mrs. Juanita Mathis Tarbert and family, Mother Adeline Lofton, church mother of the Little Rock Baptist Church of Araby, Georgia. This election goes out to Mr. Cleveland R. Lemon, oldest staff member of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home and steward of the Bethel CME Church here in Cordell, Georgia. Goes out to our beloved Miss Easter May Sanders and family, Miss Geraldine Harvey and family, Chairman Deacon Sammy and Miss Shanice McGill and family, Mayor Juanita Kinchin and family of the city of Warwick, Georgia, Deacon George and Mrs. Ann Whitehead and family. Our final selection for this morning. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.